The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of our guests and panel members and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any institution any member of the Nova Society is associated with. The material information presented on the Nova Society is for general information purposes only. Reproduction or dissemination for the purpose other than education is prohibited without express written consent of the Nova Society. We'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society. And today, myself, Dr. Hobbs, and Dr. Weldon will be having a discussion about Swifties. We're going to be talking about the Swiftie phenomena and the recent controversy surrounding Swifties and the MAGA movement, which will have more impact in this epic battle between politics and pop culture. We'll also look at the recent Supreme Court decision regarding the Texas border dispute. What options does Governor Ron Abbott of Texas have following the decision by the Supreme Court? So let's listen in.
I'm just thinking about the recent backlash by the MAGA movement on Taylor Swift.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. That didn't go over very well.
No. And been following it through my social media channels because, of course, I've got the whole range of people who are sharing the story, and they're like, because they're Swifties, and then the others who are like, I'm not a Swiftie, but I'm going to deconstruct this like you do. One of the glimmers of hope that I hold on to during this election season is, thinking about how much the popularity of Taylor Swift supersedes a lot of the political tensions that are going on. And if you're going to make Taylor Swift a political issue, those Swifties are going to come out and vote against you.
Oh, yeah.
That's what Swifties do.
Is that what they're called? Swifties?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, I don't know the whole story behind how they became Swifties, but I know that they are a very tight bunch, unified by the fact that they're Swifties. They don't even know each other, but they're like common goals here. So it's like that in and of itself is a call to arms. And we've seen similar kinds of things happen. I think it was BTS, the K-pop group, said something about the government at some point, and literally all their fans went out and did the opposite thing, so it's like these fan groups have a lot of clout and a lot of power. And because, I think some of our politicians forget that you're supposed to pay attention to popular culture. They forget that, you kind of have to be kind to those fans if you actually want to get anything. And so, the whole idea of saying, I don't even know the whole thing. I know it has something to do with the Super Bowl, and it's right. Her,
because she's dating she's dating somebody on the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah,
that's kind of funny because, again, I think it's a new thing with culture. I cannot remember. Of course, there was Beatlemania back in my time. There
Elvis Presley.
Yep. There was Elvis Presley, of course, yes. But there was also Barry Manilow at one time. I mean, there's been certain groups, but not to the extent that it is now. Now, we have on this called the Trumpists, the Trumpettes, a cult. We've called it a cult. And in many ways, and again, I noticed Brooklyn's shaking her head, yes, because she understands this. I admit, until I talked to the granddaughters, I had no idea. I couldn't. If you played a Taylor Swift song for me right now, I could not tell you that's what it was, because it's just not my genre.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm getting the sense that Swifties are almost a cult of their own.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, which cult's bigger?
Well, I guess which cult has the better humanitarian interests in mind? Who's going to benefit? Because, the thing about the Swifties is the trajectory of fandoms have been moving in this direction. The Trekkies, the Star Wars, they were a particular type of fandom, but then you get this really interesting pocket of time in the early 2000s where all the Harry Potter fans were turning to the internet and finding each other and creating a global phenomenon. And just ever since then, that interconnectivity of fandoms has really accelerated the connective tissue between all the different people who subscribe to the fandom. One of the things, having lived through the Harry Potter fandom in its earlier fever pitch days, one of the things that was readily apparent about this group was that they themselves had been othered one way or another, whether it was racially, genderly, agely, but also neurodivergently, so they were like, we've always been othered. So of course, and we're centering on this book about someone who's been othered. And so they create a group of othered people who are like co-supporting each other and empowering each other. I don't think it's an accident that in the years following the Harry Potter fandom, we have more open and transparent cultural dialogue about celebrating differences and how we all intersect. And, some of that comes from intentional activism on the part of the Potter fans, and some of it also just, emerges organically as, folks carry the thing from out of the fandom into broader society. So what's happening with the Swifties now, I think because Taylor Swift is not a geek phenomenon. She is an incredibly mainstream phenomenon. She's in that, you mentioned the Beatles, Elvis, Madonna, Michael Jackson. She's in that caliber, so she's not like an indie artist that has a very specific following. She is selling out arenas. And I was just reading earlier, probably today, in the middle of all of this, like her power is so strong that countries are inviting her to perform multiple shows because of the economic boost she brings. Which I think was also something very similar back in the 90s when Michael Jackson was touring. I remember it was a gigantic, big, huge deal that he was going to perform a couple shows in South Africa. While South Africa was going through its post-apartheid immediate healing period, they'd even erected a big giant statue of Michael Jackson. And I think it's actually on one of his greatest hits album covers. Folks rally around. And so you look at the sheer numbers. This is something else that, folks are quick to point out. Taylor Swift is selling out arenas multiple nights in a row. And our neighbors of certain political persuasions can barely fill up a gymnasium. So there's a weight there.
Yeah, I have seen, and I saw this, where Taylor Swift, I think it was 2018, put out a tweet about energizing her fan base to register to vote. And it was like, it was some outrageous number signed up to vote. And that may have had an influence on the election. These people are voting. People that are saying, and I did see this on a couple of news programs, that they will vote the way Taylor Swift tells them to vote. It's a matter of energized, and I think that's a good term to use. People that are following Taylor Swift, and again, the only thing, her relationship to football is about as far as I get with it. Even those football fans, this is a big deal. And you watch, the Fox Sports or any of the rest of them, and you see the Chiefs are playing. You're going to see her face jumping up and down. In fact, she said something. She used a profanity about getting a touchdown to her boyfriend, and the right-wing media just absolutely lost their mind that she would use profanity or this, that, and it was like, really? I mean, you listened to your guy lately? So this may be a phenomena. Those Swifties, I'm making the assumption, are far younger than I am. Although I'm sure there are a few of my age. I don't know if Brooklyn's a Swiftie or not, but okay. Nope.
No, but I know who she is, and I know one of her songs, which I had heard before, but I hadn't realized who it was because I don't listen to that type of music.
Well, I'm going to look her up. I'm going to try to see if I might be hearing her songs as I'm riding down the road. I don't know, on the radio.
You probably are. Probably
you're
are.
probably right. And I just don't have any clue. Isn't she the one where she got in a music award and somebody got up there and wanted
Kanye West.
and
I'm gonna
thought
let you finish, but it really should have gone to this other. I think it was Beyonce that he was.
Beyonce, yeah, and he got up there in the middle of the awards thing. Kanye West, a ardent Trump supporter, gets up there and thinks that he is entitled to disrupt an awards show with his opinion that, I'm sorry, I don't know who you are. I don't know where you got this entitlement from, but maybe you ought to go sit down because you're making a complete ass out of yourself.
Well, and there was one point where he was mentoring Taylor Swift, and I think that Grammy performance was the public break there. And so, and honestly, I think that's about the time that people started to realize that he was a bit batshit crazy as well. So, I mean, I'm sorry, that's rude, but I mean.
Well, I do know that Trump considers Taylor Swift a major threat because he has said multiple times that he is more popular than she. And I'm like, dear Lord, this man is nearly, 77 years old, and he's got all up in arms and all excited and defensive. What is Taylor Swift? 32, 34? She's a young woman. I mean, this would be, I mean, I am not going to compare myself to someone who is much younger than I and say, well, I'm better than more. Who cares? I mean, it's so ridiculous. I couldn't believe that. So he obviously feels that there's a huge threat there. So I would say that he knows darn well that she is more popular than he is. So he's got to make a comment to the opposite effect and try to convince himself and his base that, of course, he is the more popular of the two.
Yeah. But it does make a good point that if Swifties are as dedicated and are as socially minded as, and again, I don't know any of Taylor Swift's songs. I'm assuming that they probably have some social commentary to them of some sort. This is true, Priscilla? I don't know. Maybe?
I don't listen to Taylor Swift.
I'm
like the one millennial who doesn't.
You're the one. Okay, so we have. All right. You know what? I'm going to call Scott and ask if he knows about Taylor Swift. And they seem more multidimensional than the MAGA people. I know Scott did mention in one previous episode where somebody had taken their children to see in the movie theater a Taylor Swift concert that had gone on. And the idea of all these children just dancing around in joy. I mean, not a care in the world. And when they came out of the theater, they had to basically be escorted out because there was a protest going on outside of the theater. And of course, the parents feared for the safety of the children. So to me, Taylor Swift maybe is a great artist, because I'm not going to say she's not, because then, that might come back and haunt us. But I think she speaks to a wider range of people. Mm-hmm. And I think because she is not divisive in what she says, probably makes her a lot more dangerous to the MAGA movement. And the reason I say that is when you watch The Five on Fox, and every once in a while, I admit I hold my nose and I watch it. Every once in a while, I hold my nose and watch Fox and Friends. I cringe. I usually only make it about 20 minutes of it, but I do get past it. But they're scared. When you got Judge Jeanine Pirro, who's a Looney Tune anyway, saying she should stay out of it. We don't want to hear what she has to say. And my first comment is I'm yelling at the television. Well, what makes you think we care what you have to say? And that now there's this PSYOPs thing. I did read about that. There's a PSYOPs thing out there. They're going to use Taylor Swift as a PSYOP to be able to get voters to come in and, vote for Biden. And the fear is, now the Super Bowl's coming up this weekend. The fear is that if Kansas City wins, Taylor Swift and her boyfriend are going to take the opportunity and this comes directly out of far right news, are going to take that opportunity to endorse Biden, and then that will have a huge impact on the election. Let's forget the fact that the last poll that came out, Biden is leading Trump with women by almost 30 points. I think I'd be more worried about that one. I think that would concern me a little bit more.
I mean, so what if they endorse Biden? The idea of a Super Bowl win being the catalyst for that endorsement is speaking to like what you're saying, Brooklyn, about they're scared. It's like that's coming from a place of fear because there is literally no reason that they would politicize. There's nothing in the Swiftie culture that would turn that particular moment of joy for somebody else into a about me political moment.
I mean, and other than having a bunch of boyfriends, which I'm making the assumption she's had, she really doesn't have any baggage.
No.
I mean, she's not being prosecuted in four different jurisdictions for 91 counts of fraud or 91 felony counts. She did not just lose 300 some odd million because he raped or sexually assaulted E. Jean Carroll. She doesn't have that baggage. The greatest baggage for her would be if, the Chiefs lost the Super Bowl and her boyfriend got on there and said, yeah, he goes, I'm a great receiver, but, I spent the night out last night with Taylor and I was just too tired. Now that, of course, that's only going to probably play in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to play, but it'd play really well in San Francisco, the other team. So, but to make these kinds of, I don't know what you would call them. They're fantasy. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are opportunities to politicize anything and everything and turn it into a social media moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, and
Goebbels would be salivating. If Goebbels were alive today, he would just be all over himself in the scramble because he really was, he made use of every little scrap he possibly could to for propaganda. So I can imagine what he would do with all this if he were around today.
But she's not propaganda. She's pop culture.
I know, but
and the fact is, how does a politician think they're going to beat pop culture?
Well, but look at Trump with his reality show and his "You're Fired" or whatever it was, and the wrestling and the Trump University and all this. I mean, whatever he does, he is like a popular pop culture figure, entertainment person, whatever, supposed businessman, but he's like an infotainer, I guess.
Well, that's exactly what he is.
One question I did want to ask both of you. So now we've got Governor Abbott, who is refusing to listen to the Supreme Court, who voted in to support the federal government, and now DeSantis is going to butt in, of course.
Well, that's all for 2028.
I don't know what troops he's sending. If they're National Guard.
That's about all he could. That's all he could send.
Yeah.
He can't. I mean, he doesn't have access. I mean, the governor is in charge of the National Guard. That's all he's got.
Yeah, so apparently he's sending National Guard troops to Texas.
All right. Is Governor Abbott really thumbing his nose to the Supreme Court? Kind of, yeah. However, I don't think you're going to see a lot of pushback from the Supreme Court or the federal government in regards to this, simply because this is kind of a gray area kind of thing. This is not like South Carolina seceding from the Union or the other states seceding from the Union. This is a governor using the powers of the office to enact an agenda within the borders of his state. Let's remember, the federal government, the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy, and all the different branches of government can only come into a state. They're not supposed to be used against the people of the United States. They are strictly for defense and to be used on foreign territory. They have to basically be invited. That's why whenever you see the thing of martial law, that's when General Milley said, there's a rule, there's a law that says that the United States military cannot be used against the citizens. That's really all there is to it. When there was Hurricane Katrina, yes, the Army went down there to assist the National Guard. However, they were asked to come. The president back then, Bush, offered the assistance, and it was accepted by the governor of Louisiana, and it was gratefully accepted because the resources that the federal government had were far greater than the resources of Louisiana. That makes sense. Yeah, we could say that Abbott's thumbing his nose to the Supreme Court. However, what he's basically saying is, I'm not going to give you access to this area, federal people. I'm not giving you access to that. Does he have the right to do that? Arguably, yes, he does. That's something that's going to play out, but we have to keep in mind, we are a federal republic, and each state has its rights, and those rights should not be infringed by the federal government.
Yeah, but can't you say that arguably he doesn't, because we're talking about an international border and the borders of the United States are up to the federal government to attend to, not up to the state?
The border of the United States at the line, that's the federal government's responsibility.
Yeah, and they have to be able to get there.
Yeah, but the line of the border between Texas and Mexico is the Rio Grande.
Correct.
You can access the Rio Grande from the Gulf of Mexico. So theoretically, they can just sail their way up to that particular line. But once you get onto the land, now you're under the jurisdiction of Texas.
Like in New Hampshire and New York, they border Canada. Mm-hmm. Well, you got the St. Lawrence River.
Yep.
You got the Eisenhower Locks. I don't have to travel through New Hampshire or New York to get to that imaginary line in the middle. I could come down to St. Lawrence, and I could do it that way. So
they're gonna have to sail along, I guess. That's what I was thinking, that they would have to sail.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, Abbott does not have to grant them permission to come through his state, he can restrict access to certain areas of his state. But as Priscilla pointed out, the Rio Grande is the line. Mm-hmm. You can come up the Rio Grande all you want, and there's not a doggone thing he can do about it. But let's face it, now you got the issue. All depends on, and it gets to be a fine line, and it almost gets to be ridiculous when you think about it. So you're coming up the Rio Grande. You better not be too much on Mexico's side with your military, or you better ask Mexico if that's okay, which I think Mexico would be all right with. Coming up the Rio Grande, what the heck, a couple of, long boats, okay, fine. I mean, so there gets to be that little tricky thing where Biden would have to contact the president of Mexico and say, listen, we're going to come up the Rio Grande. And let's remember, the president of Mexico today is not a good guy. Mm-hmm. He is not, a friend of the United States. Most of his decisions in our favor are for economic reasons, not because he, believes into the ideology. That's not what we're talking about here. So the fact that they come up the Rio Grande, there's going to have to be some negotiating there to be able to make that happen, but it's doable. And you never have to step a foot onto Texas property.
Well, and in the moment, if the federal government was or if federal troops are actually needed up along the Texas border, like actually needed, Abbott would capitulate and totally let them through anyway. Because the whole dog and pony show of the wall is really to satiate the hunger of the constituents. It has literally nothing to do with security at all.
No, I know.
Just ask the Chinese. That Great Wall of China did not keep anybody out. I mean, so that's been tried before.
Yeah, and it certainly encased a lot of bodies inside it.
As Priscilla says, the government does have some leverage here. I don't know how many military bases are in Texas. I'm going to make an assumption there's a few.
Yeah.
Quite a few.
Mm-hmm.
The federal government could and which supports an awful lot of the economy. People
Mm-hmm.
don't really think about how much a military base within a state truly does support the economy. Here in South Carolina, down in Columbia, there's Fort Jackson, which is a training base down there. That is a huge boon for the Columbia economy, Columbia, South Carolina economy. If they were to move out, that would leave a gap that I don't know how they would replace. Industry simply could not replace that. So Texas and all the other states that have all of these military bases on really have to be a little careful on how they handle, because Texas, okay, you want to play ball, that's perfectly fine. Oklahoma would love to have these bases. Missouri would take them. Why? We got plenty of places we can go. And those towns that these bases are around, they're going to be ghost towns.
I'm
and
sure
then you, Governor Abbott, are going to have to explain it.
Well, and I mean, so a lot of the bases in Texas do have towns that built around them, similar to like a college campus. You know, you get your base town around it. But then you think about, there's like 3 different branches that have bases and offices in San Antonio. So if they pulled out of San Antonio, which is one of the top 4 cities in the state, that's not going to be, it's not a good decision.
No.
And, you know, and I know there's something in the Texas zeitgeist that thinks, oh, well, we don't need the military because we all have our guns. But the truth is Texas doesn't train people with guns to be militiamen.
Right.
So, you know, cool, you have your guns, but in the moment when you actually need to use it to defend and not hunt a deer.
That didn't go so well, and they were trained, supposedly.
Yeah, right? You know, it's like, probably aren't going to, you know. But, you know, also by the same token, though, I was literally just talking about this earlier today. Like, Texas is one of the only states I know where you have Texas history classes. They have a Texas pledge to the flag. They have, like, the Boy Scouts have a Texas badge that they learn. It's like indoctrinated, you know, because of the 10 years that Texas was its own country. And Texas, you know, brags like, oh, well, we can just secede whenever we want to secede, but they can't. That's actually not what it says. They can break into 5 smaller states, you know, which might be a good thing for the country, not going to lie. Texas cannot get itself fully independent from the United States.
No.
Like, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and they don't have the economy of, say, like California. California is what, the 5th largest economy in the world.
Yeah.
Texas
like
isn't
Quebec
there.
Talking about seceding from Canada. It's what are they going to do? Join up with France? I mean, it's nonsense.
Yeah, and the Texas scenario is equally as ridiculous. Once again, and it isn't only the military. Let's think of the other things of the federal government that are in Texas. NASA, where Houston was pretty much built around the idea of NASA. Take them out. What does that do to Texas? A lot. I mean, there's so many government facilities within Texas that if you pull them out, then, and that's the other reason why the idea of, Texas talks big because everything's bigger in Texas. But the fact is okay, so they secede from the Union, let's just say. And all of those federal organizations that are within Texas leave.
Yep.
Now what kind of economy do you have? Good luck.
Yeah. Well, and then they wouldn't.
Truly.
And then they would be, I mean, doomsday scenario is if they secede from the Union, well, now you need your passports just to go visit other states, and your currency probably isn't going to be accepted. And, you know, it's
export and import fees.
Yep. And I think there's a fantasy among Texans, and I think Florida shares it, and that's why Abbott and DeSantis, you know, seem to like always be hand in hand, that their states could get away with a Brexit type scenario. romanticizing it, the idea that, oh, we could have a Brexit scenario and then we could be independent. However, Brexit actually did a lot to hurt the English
Oh yeah.
economy.
Oh gosh, it was horrible.
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. That was a
And
stupid
they're
thing.
still recovering. Like the inflation right now is bananas.
Mhm.
So it's like, is that really what you want? Really?
No, it isn't. They just
No.
wanted.
No.
They just want to
They just want to
dream
talk big.
about it.
And
And
if you think about Florida, just to go back to Florida real quick, I can't see Disney staying in Florida if they were their own country, if they broke off. I just
Nor
can't
would
see it.
Canaveral. They'd have to go someplace
Well,
else.
that would go away, of course. There's 4 military bases in Florida. They would go away. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things. Again, sometimes you don't look at it from the politics. When you really think about, all right, what is possible and what is it? You got to look at it from the economics.
Yep. And the universities.
And the university, yeah, this isn't like when there was the secession back before, during the Civil War. This is not the same because the economies of these states rely on a lot of federal government involvement as to the facilities that they have there. Number one, they also have corporations. The southern states before the Civil War was basically agrarian. And one of the reasons they lost the war was because they were a little too agrarian. The North had the industry, and the South but they were successful agrarians. They were very successful at it. But today, even South Carolina, yes, do we still have cotton farms? Yes, we do. Do we still have tobacco farms? Yes, we still do. But that is not the main source of income for South Carolina anymore. We have BMW, we have Michelin, we have BASF. All of these industries are here today, and they're not going to accept, oh, well, we're breaking off from the union. They'll say, okay, fine, we'll go someplace else, which is easy for them to do. Yeah, they're going to lose a little bit of money in the facilities they've got, but their attitude is, we'll make it back. It's not a real big deal. And it destroys the economy of the state that everybody moves out of. And I think one of the great examples would be Disney and Florida. Without Disney, without Disney and those theme parks, what does Florida got except for beaches?
Alligators.
Well, they got alligators and palmetto bugs. Those big, really huge, cockroaches, and that kind of. So really, when you think about it, it is untenable for Texas.
Yeah, but Florida relies on the tour. Like its industry is tourism.
Yep.
People move down there because they wanted sunshine and beaches, but tourism. So it's like you make the access harder to get to like the Florida Keys or whatever, and it will have an impact. And I think with the whole like legislation that state's trying to do just to puff its chest up and look good, they genuinely are forgetting about the power of the people who could actually make a difference. And that's why I think the DeSantis Disney place has kind of entered a I guess not really a truce, but definitely an unspoken, like, what do you call it in a war when everyone's just kind of like stalemated?
Oh, it's a
sort of like a détente.
Yeah. So just like we're gonna coexist for a little while now, and you do your thing and we'll do our thing. And I mentioned a moment ago, Mark, about the stuff. Disney has multiple foreign parks. So Paris, Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Shanghai.
Sure.
And so they do have the infrastructure. But I think where the idea of if Florida were to pull out of the nation, which I don't know anything about Florida's constitution, but I'm going to bet that's not an option. Walt Disney World is Disney's largest property. And so if they were to effectively close their borders by making some really stupid political decisions, as a corporation, Disney has no reason to stay.
Nope.
They may leave the park and let it get abandoned, like We're not like you're not gonna get the property, but there's no reason to stay. And sometimes I feel like the folks who are rolling back their shoulders and puffing their chests, they're doing it for show because, looping back around to what you were saying a moment ago about Trump and popular culture, politics has become a entertainment game at this juncture. Like, there's real politics, and then there's the one that everybody sees, and that's the stuff that gets spun in the media, and that's the stuff that is driving people to these rallies. But the real politics, they don't see. And so on the one hand, there is the hopeful reality that those people who are the real politicians are going to follow the law. We do see that little nugget of that now and again bubbling up from the Supreme Court, like, well, the law says this, so maybe we should pay attention. But that gets silenced by the dog and pony show.
Yeah.
Like, people don't see it.
And you're right. It all comes down to the decisions that are made in politics. And, in a lot of cases, this is like a reality TV show. We've become almost a reality TV show, which probably in our next episode, we should probably discuss. And this was something that was asked from our listener in Germany about education, to show how stupid decisions being made, such as in Florida, can impact. Look at the brain drain that's going on in college universities in Florida because people will not teach there. And that goes all the way back into the grade schools and the primary schools. Because of the rules have been put into place, people are afraid to teach. And now that brain drain's coming out. So I think probably our next one, I think that's going to be a great topic because we're all educators. How does politics impact higher education and education at the secondary levels? So I think that'd be a great. It'll answer a question that we were asked, and at the same time, we get to look at politics and the impact that it might have on all the levels of education in the country. All right, guys, You guys take care.
Yeah, you too.
All right,
you too.
Have a good one.
Have a good weekend. Take care.
Bye.
Yep, you too. Okay, bye.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this week's episode, the Phoenix Research Group, an independent research consortium offering social issue solutions to NGOs and international government agencies through multidisciplinary, nonpartisan, and unbiased research. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, Podkite, who does all our analytics, iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source of music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all these and other quality platforms mentioned in our description. We'd like to thank our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, a question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershworth, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Brooklynn and Weldon, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.